hit my broadcast button. We are PG-13 tonight.
I want to make sure we get that squared away, guys.
It is a family-friendly adult audience. However, no young little toddlers. Definitely want to scoot them out the door. But first, I want to welcome everybody to the Monday HR Happy Hour series. This is a chance where we bring in helpful contributors to speak on various career issues and resources and perspectives that help out human resource professionals when they are either passive or actively looking at the job market. Tonight, I'm really excited. We have one of our founding contributor panelists, Gary Sapir, who I know and met about 6 years ago as a former past president of HR ABC, and his chapter that year took the Pinnacle Award, which is a very, very prestigious honor, and as well an honor to have him this evening speaking on the value of a cultural fit from both the candidate and the employer's perspective. So with that, before I hand it over, I would ask anybody, if you have a question, please go over to our chat and ask it. If Gary's speaking, don't think that your typing would interrupt him, and then we can come back to it in between pauses or when there's some questions being asked. You will also have a chance to go up on the camera, and we would invite your contribution or participation from that avenue as well. So that said, I'm going to push it right over to Gary Sapir. Gary, take it away. Great to see you again.
Mike. Thank you so much, Michael. So I've since found out, since starting the Google Hangouts, that I really am technologically challenged. I mean, I'm probably far more comfortable speaking in front of an audience of 1,000 than I am right now, you know, in this living room. But with Mike in charge, we'll make it happen. So clearly, this is going to be informal. Mike had, I guess, after doing how many competitive edges, maybe 8 or 10 on the same topic, hopefully different audiences. Mike kind of asked me to change it up a bit and come up with some new words of wisdom. So came up with this topic. I changed the title a little bit. It's the role of culture fit in the hiring process. And as Mike said in his introduction, I basically want to talk about the importance of culture fit as a concept to organizations when they're hiring and selecting, right? But more importantly, the importance of culture fit to all of you as potential applicants when you're looking for a job, and how to assess the organization for culture fit, which I think is a real challenge both on the part of the organization and on the part of the applicant, the candidate. In my experience, and let me check it out with all of you, I think that, and from everything that's written about cultural fit, it's probably every bit as important as issues of skills and competencies and background and education and all those other factors that organizations look for when they're hiring candidates. So this culture fit has become a popular term in the last 5 or 10 years, and we'll try and define it so we have some common understanding. But how many of you in your experience have actually left organizations because at some point, perhaps early on, you found out there is not a good cultural fit? See somebody there? JR?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I just left my company after 5 months. It's a culture of fear and intimidation, and that is so not what I have ever in all of my career been exposed to, nor want to ever be again. I mean, the CEO basically told his executive team, if I tell you to jump off a balcony, you have 2 choices. You can jump off a balcony or you can leave. I chose to leave.
Do they offer life insurance?
No, unfortunately they don't.
Oh, well, there's no choice then, right?
No, none at all.
Wow. Anybody else left the company because, again, at some point you found out that there was not a good fit? No, okay. I know I've had a horror story. Probably, well, it's over 10 years, well, over 15 years now. Took a job for a short 3-month period, and it really was one of those too good to be true. So I had come from a 6,000 employee company where I headed the people development function, and oh, Julie's here. Welcome, Julie. And took a job with a company that had about 100 employees. I only took it because they just sold me on working for this company, and they offered me a Mercedes-Benz as well if I signed on. Should have been a clue, but I was blinded at that point. So I lasted probably 3 months, JR, so a little shorter period. And it sounds, maybe it's the same company, I don't know, but yeah, it was a horrible, horrible environment where the owners cursed at each other and cursed at employees and fired, terminated people summarily, almost on a daily basis, and just really abused the heck out of everybody in the organization. So people were totally intimidated, and clearly a lot of people stayed on because they were willing to tolerate that. In this company's case, they did pay very well and offered some, really good incentives to sign up, but they had to do that because their culture was, so challenging that I don't think anyone would work there unless there was some, incredible payoff on the other side. So clearly, cultural fit is important to organizations. They try and assess it in their applicants and employees. And employees and applicants are always trying to get a good handle on what the culture fit is in an organization. So the question is, how do you do that? So I want to come up with a common definition of what culture is so we can kind of create a baseline with that. So the first slide gives us a second slide, gives us a definition. The environment in the workplace made up of shared values, beliefs, underlying assumptions, attitudes, and behaviors. And I invite you to, if you want to add something to that, expand on it, or even disagree with it, feel free. But I have found, working in the world of organizational development, that, probably the most important element of that definition is the behavioral side. I think that culture typically is manifest by behaviors. When you walk into an organization, there are things you can observe and things that you certainly will experience that will give hints to the culture, but the most obvious elements of the culture is how people are behaving towards you and towards each other, right? Anyone want to add to that? I mean, when you walk into an organization, what is it that gives you some hints as to the culture?
Their mission statement.
Yep. Values, which may be in the lobby, right? Posted in,
Lobby. Yep.
Those kinds of things.
Just saying good morning in the morning when people walk in and say good morning to you or not.
Or not, as the case may be, right. So it's the presence of behaviors, and it's also the absence of some behaviors that kind of give you a clue as to what the culture is, how people in the organization interact with each other, interact with you. You don't have a lot of time to assess that when you're going in for an interview, for example. Sometimes you don't have a chance to even read the mission statement, but oftentimes you can see those values that are displayed, although that's not always a reliable indicator of the culture, is it? I mean, the fact that they say that honesty and integrity and energy and goodwill and all of those things, are on paper, doesn't necessarily mean that it's manifest in the actual behavior of their employees. So how many of you have found that there's a great inconsistency or incongruence with what's on paper and what may be on, in terms of the actual behavior in the organization? JR?
Well, the other thing is I did my research, and I looked them up on Glassdoor, and there were mixed reviews. Come to find out that their marketing department did a lot of the positive reviews. And of course, when people write a bad review, it's attributed to an employee who was either fired or resigned and was disgruntled with the organization.
Interesting. That seems to, that strikes me as somewhat unethical, as if the marketing department is providing employee reviews, although they may be employees. Probably
Right.
not a great deal of...
Or they're asking specific employees to write a positive review, and because of the environment of fear and intimidation, nobody's going to say no.
Yeah. So maybe you can just very briefly, it sounds like you had certainly a less than optimum work experience, but what is some of the outward manifestations of a culture that culture that you found intolerable?
Shouting, swearing. playing with employees' money. That's the reason I left. Our policy was that if payroll fell on a Saturday, Sunday, or holiday, that you would be paid the preceding day. And the CEO is telling me, no, that is not the case. Our policy is. And he made me go look up the policy manual, which I did. And lo and behold, the policy said preceding workday. And he goes, see? And I said, pre means prior, preceding. Well, it's wrong. I said, well, it's in your handbook. It's in the company public drive. It's in both the 2013 and 2014 handbook. And every employee has a copy of the payroll calendar. And now they're asking why the change. So I told them that the change was because of the CEO's decision. So he accused me of throwing him under the bus, and I quit.
Got it. Got it. So how important in general is it to everyone in the hangout room to try and assess culture and to try and assess your cultural fit with an organization in terms of your decision to accept the job or not? How does that rank? I mean, when you're out there interviewing?
Well, number one for me, I could tell you.
Okay. The rest?
I mean, I would say it's probably number 2 behind compensation for me.
Got it. Anyone else?
It's a little difficult to assess. I mean, when I'm interviewed, I've always felt that if I feel comfortable with the environment, I like to sit in the lobby thing also and assess how people interact before I go in on the interview. And if I don't feel comfortable with the individual that I'm either interviewing or being interviewed by, money gets old quickly.
True, true. Francine, I didn't hear everything you said. You're kind of fading in and out. Anybody else having that problem? The sound was faded in and out. So I think I caught the gist of what you said.
Okay.
But clearly a highly important factor. May rank after compensation, but for most people, they want to know that they're going to go into work each and every day having somewhat of a good experience, right? Some of those experiences not totally within our control or even the company's control, but for the most part, you want to get a sense that your values align with the organization's values. So let's look at the definition of cultural fit, because that's really the concept we're looking at. How do you assess the organization's culture? How do you assess your own culture? How do they assess your culture, your personal culture? So there is a fit. So definition of culture fit, the ability or willingness of an employee to comfortably work in an environment that's congruent with his own beliefs, values, attitudes, needs, and behaviors. So cultural fit indicates the likelihood that a job candidate will be able to conform and adapt to the core values and collective behaviors that make up an organization. Everybody agreeable to that definition?
Yes.
But basically, the company certainly has some values that are exhibited through organizational behavior and policies and procedures, right? How their management team actually behaves, what they require of their employees. And we all have, our own personal culture. We have our values, our beliefs, our attitudes, our behaviors, etc. And when there's a good fit, obviously it's a much more enjoyable experience to go into work each and every day. When it's not, it can make life miserable, because then you're stuck with the decision that says, look, my values are in conflict with the organization. I need the compensation. I might even like the people that I work with, but I'm having to compromise myself, my personal values, each and every day when I go to work. Example of that I ran into recently, I do a lot of work. Hello to our newest attendees. Example of that would be do a lot of work with 360 multi-rater assessments. And a few months ago, I was doing some work with an organization where when I compiled all of the results of the 360, everybody familiar what a 360 is? Mm-hmm. Where you get feedback from various employees. Actually, it was an organizational assessment. It's an organizational survey, and there was a 360 component. At any rate, the survey at one point asked about level of commitment. And what I found was that, for the most part, in the results, the young females, particularly of childbearing age, had much lower scores on the area of commitment than the males in the organization. And I was truly puzzled. So as I was going through the surveys and I was giving feedback to various members of the management team and staff, I noticed this trend, and I asked one of the female employees, why is it that most all of the younger females are getting dinged on the competency that relates to commitment? She said, well, that's an easy one. We tend to go home on time. Actually, when the 5 o'clock bell rings, we have kids in after school care, and we have to get dinner on the table for our families, and that's part of our personal commitment and values. But the company really values those people that are able to stay late and come in and work on weekends. For most of us, that's a huge strain, and we would probably have to sacrifice family to some extent to meet that value, right? How many of you worked in organizations where that seemed to be a value? So your performance and your value to the company was somewhat judged based on your willingness to put in long hours, whether it be weekends, stay late, come in early.
Yeah.
Josh, I see you shaking your head.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of my first jobs out of the Marine Corps was working for a Japanese firm, and they really like it when you come in early and stay late. Like that.
And that probably is a factor of the Japanese culture. It's also a factor of the American culture at this point, right? So interesting conversation I had with management, because management said, what we really value is a strong commitment, but when push came to shove and we started to define the behaviors that demonstrated strong commitment, I think everybody had to agree it really related to the amount of time you spend in the job. In management, many of the management team would walk around and see who were in their seats early in the company and who were in their seats, at 6 or 7 o'clock at night, and also on the weekends as well. A few of my clients reflect those values as well. And again, I think when you put an employee at odds with the organizational culture, and there's a conflict between your personal values versus the organizational values, a lot of stress is generated, and how that typically ends up is somebody's going to lose. It's usually the employee, particularly, or it's the family of the employee, right? If you're forced to sacrifice your personal values. Everybody with me on that? I think we probably could come up with all can come up with some work-related stories that relate to having that kind of a conflict. I know I have one of the probably one of the most stressful experiences I had in my work life was when I did work for that 6,000 employee company and had a large staff, and I had a boss who was vice president of HR, and he was asked at some point to do some budget cuts, and that affected my department as well. Came to me, told me I needed to slash my budget. I did that a few times. Turned out Friday came. It happened to be the prom night for my daughter graduating high school that year, and my wife had told me, on certain terms, on this Friday, you need to be home at like 5 o'clock because the limo's coming up with all my daughter's friends in it, and we were going to meet and greet and give them their champagne cocktail and take pictures. And so this was kind of a non-negotiable, right? It was like my marriage and my daughter were the job, right? So I didn't think there was a problem until about 3 o'clock in the afternoon when my boss came to me, and you can tell he was highly stressed, and he said that he was asked to cut the budget by another 10%, which means I had to do the same, and he needed a report on his desk by the end of the day, basically figuring out how I was going to do it, which employees I was going to terminate as a result, because that's what we were down to. And that at 9 o'clock on Saturday morning, he was meeting with the executive team to make his presentation. So at that moment in time, my stress level, my blood pressure went through the roof, and that was one of those defining moments, right, where I had to decide, what do I do now? Do I call my wife and tell her I won't be home at 5, I'm going to miss the whole deal with the limo coming up and pulling up, and or tell my boss, stick it to him and say, I can't do it. So the big question is, how did I handle that situation? What do you think? How would you handle that situation?
That's a tough one.
It was tough.
I'd probably do the whole go take care of your daughter thing and then go back to work and finish up.
And Janet, that's the winning answer. In fact, it is what I did. I actually mustered up the courage. And again, he was in a highly excitable state at that point. And he was cursing at that time. And that wasn't the culture of the company, but he was so stressed by the whole reduction issue. But I did muster the courage, and that's one day I have to be home by 5 o'clock, which I intend to do. And I will stay up the entire night if I have to work out the budget cuts and to get a report to you in time so that you can present it to the executive team at 9 the next morning. And he reluctantly agreed, but I came out of it still married, and my daughter still speaks to me, and that was many years ago. But I do remember it as one of those incredibly difficult situations where it put me in conflict with the company and my own values, and how to work that out. Unfortunately for many, that conflict starts on day one with the job for those that find that, oops, I made a big mistake. There isn't a very good culture fit. This isn't an organization where I can see myself thriving. What do I do now? So as we go forward, I want to talk to you a little bit about how do you assess culture in a company when you only have the very little time of maybe preparing for the interview, going to the interview, and trying to make that all happen in a very compressed period of time. Why don't we put that next slide up?
Okay. 1 second. Bear with me, guys. Here it is.
So the bottom half of that says culture fit indicates the likelihood that a job candidate will be able to conform and adapt to the core values and collective behaviors that makes up an organization. So, culture fit doesn't mean that you have this perfect mesh with the company and there's a perfect fit from day one. It simply means that there is an ability and a willingness to adapt, right, and to conform. And I say that knowing that there's always going to be some push, some shove, some stress involved in conforming and adapting and role shifting. But if you get pushed too far, if it becomes a real stretch to conform, and if you're asked to do that too often, I think we could probably assume not a very good culture fit, right? So in my coaching practice, I'm always talking to people about role shifting, about adapting, and about shifting. And if you're asked to do that in limited quantities, right? But if you have to do that 8 hours a day in order to fit into that company's culture and their values, it becomes extremely wearing and stressful. And at some point, you're going to decide this isn't worth it, right? Are you all kind of relating to a little bit of what I'm saying? Have you all felt at some point that the companies, the organizations that you were working with, I know JR, certainly in your case, I think Josh, you mentioned that. Everyone else, have you all had an experience where you felt it was not a good fit?
Yeah.
What do you think, Gabby? Not hearing.
There's a few of us without a microphone. I know Abby doesn't have one. Jelly would love to hear from you. Can you unmute yourself? Is that possible? Yay.
I'm trying.
All right.
Did I get it?
All right.
Yeah. There we go.
If I do this, we can put...
Yeah, so did you hear my question, Jelly?
No, no question.
Okay. Anybody else?
Okay, that is...
I've had a situation where there was just a little bit of personal relationships between part of my staff and senior management and the CEO, and it just crossed the line just a little bit too much from professional behaviors, if you would.
Got it.
In terms between senior management, of which I was a member, and our own staff, and the communication that goes across the line. So the company itself might have a good culture, but then different departments within the company have their own subcultures, if you would.
So true.
And sometimes that conflicts with the overall culture, and it can make for a conflict in the relationship, and it did for me that I had with the CEO because of some other personal relationships. It was a little bit too complicated and complex.
So there are subcultures in organizations, and if you're working within that subculture, yes, that requires another level of fit. It's not always congruent with the organizational culture itself. And I think as HR professionals, we are particularly sensitive to some of those issues. We're certainly sensitive to the ethical issues in an organization. We're usually more aware of those issues, and so that oftentimes, as HR professionals, puts us in a greater state of conflict with folks in the organization, right?
Absolutely.
It's part of our role to be aware of maybe ethical issues and try and correct them if we can. It's very difficult when the higher the level the ethical breach is at, the more stress it puts us under, right? Mm-hmm. So moving on, I want to talk about very quickly how organizations assess cultural fit, because most organizations are into doing that, right? I'd say it's probably every bit, if not more important than skills fit and background fit, etc. But lots of organizations use personality or job fit assessments. I know I do with my clients. I use an assessment tool. It's a profiling tool that looks at thinking styles and characteristics and traits and occupational interests, and combines all three to give us a sense of someone's job fit. And it also takes in cultural differences, cultural norming. Some people use strictly use personality assessments, Myers-Briggs, or DISC kinds of assessments to get a sense of, again, personality. They then usually make gut-level decisions that, based on this profile, this person will or will not fit in the organization, or will or will not fit in the team. However inaccurate that might be, certainly a lot of those personality assessments are not supposed to be used to assess job fit. They're not validated for hiring purposes, but organizations do that. Back to the slide, there's certainly the interview process, and that is basically the role of the interviewer to look at verbal and nonverbal cues of the applicant, the candidate, and try and get a sense as to whether the way they're responding and how they're responding, the content and the nonverbals, will fit with. Oftentimes, what the interviewer is really looking at in terms of fit is, will they fit with me? Do they mesh with my team? Will they mesh with me as a leader? Right. So there's a big fallacy and danger in doing that. But most interviewers are more comfortable with people who are similar to themselves, which is why behavioral interviewing became so popular. We want to objectify the interview as much as possible, because if we simply go to our gut, we're basically going to measure how well somebody matches me, not necessarily the organizational culture. So some other ways, back to the slide, that the organization might assess fit. Back to the slide. There we go. Is certainly the content and the attitude displayed in the answers to the interview questions. So if an interviewer is looking for someone who is light and bubbly and just a delight to talk to, that may give them a clue and a cue as to whether there's a good job fit. How they've handled work situations in the past. If they're a good behavioral interviewer, they'll ask the right questions, past performance being the best predictor of future performance, and they'll basically say, gee, based on their answer that they're used to working 12 or 14-hour days, I think they will be a good fit for this company. I think as of late, organizations are going to social media and doing the research on social media to assess job fit as well. Is this a party animal, or is this someone who's focused on building their profession? Whatever they might find out via social media can give them some strong cues. And Unfortunately, I think more often than not, organizations look to their gut, right? And interviewers kind of look to their gut. And if you ask most interviewers how they made their decision, they will probably say, "I just felt good about this candidate," right?
Mm-hmm.
How many of you have experienced that in talking to interviewers and asking them how they made their decision?
I mean, I know from my perspective, talking to hiring managers, it's funny to hear that because it's almost as if they're trying to validate that gut experience. It's almost for their own self-reassurance, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, definitely. And I've heard from so many people that they have a really good sense of the right candidate, or they trust their intuition, and all the studies kind of reveal that intuition is really a factor of how someone perceives someone else, typically on the scale of how similar they are to that person, right? So if you're really comfortable with someone and that comfort level is experienced rather quickly, it's usually based on the fact that there's a great perception of similarity.
Mm-hmm.
And quite the opposite, too. Dissimilarity leads to a sense of discomfort and has a lot to do with how our brain functions, the amygdala, which sends out, hormones that make us feel uncomfortable when we're with someone who seems different than ourselves. Very ancient part of our brain, but we really have to be careful that we don't rely on our gut too often. To some extent, perhaps, but for the most part, we want to try and objectify. So on to the next slide. How do we, as candidates, assess an organization's culture? And here's where I think there's a lot of opportunity to practice. So Mike, do you have that slide up?
Do you guys see it? How do you assess organization's culture?
No, I don't.
I see it.
Oh, you do? Okay, I have a blank screen for some reason. I don't know why. But did the rest of you see it? Yep. Thumbs up. That's strange. I don't see anything on my screen. But anyway, let me go through it then. Instead of reading from the screen, because I don't have it in front of me, I apologize. I'll look at the paper here. So one of the first things, and I know this sounds like it's interviewing 101, but looking at some of the artifacts and objects that are on walls and on desks, and even the absence of that in some offices where in talking to an employee or the interviewer, they said they're really not allowed to have anything on their walls. They're not allowed to have personal artifacts, and certainly that would give you a big clue, I think, into the organizational culture if they're told what they can have in their office space or cubicle space and not, beyond obviously offensive material, right? What it's limited to, if it's work related or not. So if you see lots of awards and recognition kinds of objects, I think that can give you some information as opposed to any sign that any objects that or an office that's devoid of work-related information, right? Now, certainly that can give you good information about a person's personal culture, but also the organizational culture. You might look at how furniture is arranged. How, is it a cubicle environment? Is it an open office space? Where does the management have their offices? Recently had a client who where everybody was in small cubicles, including a lot of the mid-level managers, but the high-level managers were on a separate floor behind a card access only, entryway once you got off the elevator. What does that tell you? How
Jerry,
would
are you still not seeing the slide?
I am not. No,
Slide 5. How do you assess organization's culture is up right now.
Not seeing it. I have nothing on my screen, unfortunately.
Do you see any of us at all?
I see you down at the bottom in the little, in the film strip.
I'm gonna unload and reload the slide if that's okay.
Sure.
So now, are you seeing Janet?
No.
Okay.
No,
Janet. So I guess everybody else is seeing. So let's reload the slide. See what happens. Okay. Well, we are on slide 5, for those of you who
Well,
can see and hear me.
is everybody with us? I just want to do a little check out
Yes.
there. Okay, and you're all seeing the slide. So I'm going to look at the slide offline, if that's okay, because there's nothing on my screen. But the point is you want to be aware of the environment because it can give you a lot of clues about the culture. As I said, where people are located, is management separated or are they with their teams? Is top-level leadership, off in the tower? There we go, I've got it now, right? And so it gives you a sense of the exclusivity or not, and whether there's a strong hierarchy and whether people are going to be treated somewhat equally, and the whole attitude about how employees are treated for the most part. You might look at bulletin boards and certainly newsletter content, and look at what that's focused on. Are there lots of, who are the stakeholders that are highlighted in newsletters and bulletins? Is it the employees, or is it the clients, or is it the leadership team, right? And I think that says a lot. Oftentimes in a mission statement, a company will be somewhat transparent about where their value is. We value our employees first, and we value our customers next, et cetera. Or it might be quite reversed. So there are companies that certainly do put their employees first. And you might see that very clearly in newsletters in terms of whether they're highlighting customers, whether they're highlighting employees, whether they're not highlighting anyone, whether they're highlighting their leadership team. So who are they talking about? What's posted? And lastly, the interaction of employees as you walk around, the organization, the halls, the cubicles, the dining areas. Do they have a dining area? Do they even have a place where employees can congregate and eat lunch, based on the size of the company, of course? And what does that look like? Is it thrown together? Is it a minimal space? I've gotten strong impressions about companies based on the amount of resources they put into the common areas for employees, right? Have any of you worked in companies that had, great employee facilities?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, when I worked at both MTV, Warner Music Group, all of these employees, when I was over at SpaceX, every one of these cultures that had very strong cultures, had very robust employee services in that regard. Yeah, it was a good indicator, actually. That's a good point.
And there are companies that are known for that, right? JM Family being a local company where everybody talks about the pool that they have, the concierge services that they have. You can order. What else?
They have dinners. They have staff that are working on their computer, and there'll be a contest for a massage or for a free dinner, or they take them on on their own boat cruises. They do a lot of employee recognition programs throughout the organization.
So USAA has a Zen room, which is just a low-lit room where there's soft music and people can, if they're needing to unwind or decompress. They also have a nap room, literally understanding that some employees are working long hours and better that you come back, refresh, recharge, and versus driving all over the city. So it's a great statement.
Yeah, that's the culture I've always come from. Beer on Fridays, large refrigerator just for our beer delivery on a Friday. Once we made our quarter, getting a massage therapist in, 15-minute massages for the employees. Just a thank you.
Why did you ever leave, Janet?
The company got sold, unfortunately. And they moved the headquarters to Atlanta. I'm not really a Southern girl.
Okay. I tell you, as I go into various client organizations, I have a great opportunity to experience different cultures, and usually I get that sense. The moment I walk in the lobby, there are some companies, where the receptionist can't, be more hospitable. One client I have in Miami, literally, not only do they ask you if you'd like a drink when you come in, something that quench your thirst, incredibly polite about it, but if you say yes, they literally, the receptionist turns to the credenza behind her reception area and pulls out a silver tray and puts a crystal glass on the tray along with bottled water and serves it to you. And that gives you a strong, and it's so different than other companies I walk into who may totally ignore you or make you wait, for 20 minutes, or simply be overtly rude. And it's just such a palpable sense of what that culture is, and usually it's consistent throughout the organization. In that organization that serves you on a silver tray, everyone has that customer service attitude and spirit, right? It just follows through your whole experience. There are other organizations I walk into where, again, the lobby area can be very telling, where employees are loud and it's very spirited, and they don't speak in hushed voices when they're walking through the lobby area, no matter who might be sitting there, and they're speaking in many different languages, and it's just a very energetic, but also it can be kind of a disruptive environment, right? A little bit of chaos. And then other environments where everybody speaks in hushed tones in the lobby, and someone comes down to greet you, and escort you upstairs, and that may be a factor of security, but just a whole different sense about the organization and how it's run, right? So you just have to be very, very mindful of what's happening behaviorally, so you can come up with a greater sense and an expectation of what that culture might be like. Anybody have any quick stories about overt cultures that you've entered into, maybe in an interview experience? You immediately got a sense of what that company is truly like behind the scenes? I know I'm very sensitive to that, to the way I'm received at a reception area and how I'm greeted or not, as the case may be, right? I went, just last week, I went to a client in Miami, and it was raining, and there was no parking in the front of the building where the main entrance was, so I pulled around to an area where there was parking, and there was another entry there, but it was the back door. So I went to the back door, and you got to picture this. My car is already parked, it's heavy rain, and it's locked. So I knocked on the door, and there was a gate there too, but someone came just up to the gate and said, "You have to go around." And I'm saying this, well, going around was probably about a block and a half to walk around to the front of the building in the rain, and there was no sidewalk. And I'm kind of gesturing, I'm getting wet here, it's raining, can you just open the door? And they said, "No, go around." And so I had to walk through the parking lot in the pouring rain to go to the main entryway, and when I got in there, I was a little upset, I was a little cranky, and I said to the security guard there, it was behind the desk, "Is this really your policy that you can't open the door?" And he said, "Absolutely, that is our policy, it's part of our security, you have to come in the front entryway." And then I went further and I said, "Well, after my meeting, if it's still raining, since my car is parked out back, will you allow me, I'm no longer a security threat because I've been in here for an hour at that point, will you allow me out the back door?" "Absolutely not. Those are our policies." So I didn't refuse to work with the company as a result of that, but I certainly got a good sense of what the company might be like, right? Wasn't happy about it. Okay, on to our next slide. There we go. So I want to just give you some tools. So what are some other ways, other than looking at your environment, what are some ways that you can assess the culture? And I would suggest that just asking some very pointed questions of the interviewer when it comes time for you to do that can really be helpful. What would you tell a friend about you? These are questions you as a candidate might ask of the interviewer to get a sense of organizational culture and your own culture fit. What would you tell a friend about your organization if he or she was about to start working here? What's the one thing you would most like to change about this organization? Now, granted, you may not have that sense of comfort in asking some of these questions, but quite frankly, I would. And you only get one shot, really, at doing this, and you might be looking at basing your career on this company. So I would try and be as thorough as possible in asking some of those questions. Just why don't we put some of those up again? Everybody, I think, is going to get this handout. So now, who's a hero around here and why? So, what qualifies as hero status? What's your favorite characteristic that's present in this company? What kinds of people fail in your organization? Trying to dig a little bit. This is like a behavioral interview. What's your favorite question to ask a candidate for a job in your company? You may have already been asked that question during the interview. But these are questions that really can give you a sense of what's valued in the organization. And sometimes you get lucky enough to get this interviewer who's willing to be somewhat transparent, right, and frank and forthright, and willing to kind of say, you know what, here is the good, the bad, and the ugly in this organization. Here's some other questions. They're not on the screen, but just want to pass it by you. What 3 words or phrases would you use to describe the company or department culture? How does the company handle conflict or differing opinions? I know had I asked that in one company, they would have told me that they don't handle differing opinions. It's not allowed in this company, right? How does the company recognize employee accomplishments? Does the company have a code of ethics? To your point, JR, they may have a code of ethics, but they may not follow it. Describe the leadership or managerial style at your company. I think that's a very telling one. What is the valued leadership style in this company? What qualities do the most successful employees in your company possess? What's the company's attitude towards professional and educational advancement? So those kinds of questions that I would encourage you not to be shy to ask. And I see a bunch of people out there that have had a few jobs already in your career, right? I think for those of you that are seasoned, have been around the block a bit, the cultural issue becomes even more important, right? At this stage in your career, you probably want to find a job that not only pays well, but really kind of makes it an enjoyable or a comfortable, if not enjoyable, experience to go into each and every day. Last slide. Last suggestion is to be mindful. Mindful is a pretty popular word these days. What do I mean by mindful? I guess the definition of mindful is truly being in the moment, being aware of what's going on around you, staying in the present, and being sensitive to that. So being on an interview is a perfect time to be mindful. All of the things we talked about, I think, require some level of mindfulness. So, get out of your stress and concern about the interview itself and soak in the experience. How were you treated while interviewing? Were you offered some refreshments on a silver tray? Or, was the interviewer sitting there having their own refreshments and ignoring you entirely and your comfort level entirely? What phrases do the interviewers use frequently that might give you a clue into what's important to them, at least, and their team? Is there a theme or unspoken tone to the questions asked? So we all come away with a sense of the interview experience itself, right? It was a good interview. It was an unplanned interview. It was totally unstructured. Interviewer was unprepared. So was the team. Whatever, or it was quite organized. These people have their act together. I think that's a great cue. It's the organization and its culture itself, right? How does the environment feel to you? Is it neat and orderly? Again, are there nice open spaces? Do you get a sense that employees are valued within this environment? How prepared are the interviewers? Are they on time? Were you expected to be on time? Did the receptionist greet you? Did the receptionist make any attempt to make conversation with you? Did they have their head buried? Were they too busy and stressed to get their work done to even be polite to you as an applicant? Were you given an interview schedule? Sometimes that happens, sometimes that doesn't, right? But all of those cues can give you a sense as to how the organization on a macro level actually operates, right? And you want to be sensitive to that. Usually at the end of an interview, you walk away with an impression, right? And it's not the impression of the entire company, but it's usually an impression of the interview experience, of the interviewer, who may or may not be the hiring manager, but how business in general is conducted at this company. And like I said, I know I've often left with a sense that even with when I'm interviewing for projects, that this is an organization that has their act together or not, as the case may be, right? What are the impressions you've left interviews with most recently?
I will comment. Sometimes I've been to an organization, great entrance. I went through their guard gate, gave my name, said I had an appointment. The guard said, "Oh, yes, you do," showed me where to go, went into the main building, was taken around the property by the CEO, who knew the first names of several staff and others in the 600-plus organization. But during the interview, after asking all of the technical questions pertaining to HR, he turned around and he said, "I'm just going to ask you a few other questions." And he looked me straight in the eye and he said, "If you were a vehicle, what would you be?"
Okay.
So I said, and then I gave him my answer, and then he said, "Which part?" And then he asked, "Why?" I received an offer for that position. I don't know why these particular questions were asked. I did ask, but when I met senior management, they said, one or two of them said to me, "What were you?"
Okay.
So
everybody has their auto identity in this company.
Yeah.
Well,
So
it worked for you. You probably should share that with everyone so that they can use it too.
I think the key in that particular situation is some people may ask questions just to throw us off. And if I just focus on what exactly would I be responsible for and not let things throw off, we could always ask the question once we get an offer.
Mm-hmm.
Until that time that we get the offer, I like to just stay focused for the most. But when I gave my answer, I told him I was I'd be a Cadillac, by the way.
Like that.
And when he said why, I said because it's a classic, it provides comfort to all who ride in it. Thinking in HR. But when I gave him my answer of what part, he said, "Nobody ever gave me that answer." And then I said, "Nobody ever asked me that question."
Excellent. I can actually see where he's going with that. I mean, if you said you were the steering wheel, that probably would convey some, level of leadership, right? If you said you were the
engine or the motor.
The engine, right? You're right. That kind of drives it forward. Is maybe the power behind the vehicle, and if you were the seats, I don't know. You provide some level of comfort, or if you were the airbags, you were certainly focused on safety. It's interesting. I think it's Apple. Maybe some of you have read this recently too, or Microsoft. But I think it was Apple that used to ask these off-the-wall questions to all their candidates. I think they were more getting to assess creativity and innovation by asking a lot of off-the-wall questions, and they decided just in the last year to stop doing that because they found that the answers to the questions weren't really validated, and they didn't lead to any clearer understanding of whether a candidate is suitable for the job. So they decided to do away with that. But they were known for asking these off-the-wall questions. And I think part of it is just to see, whether it throws a candidate. Can a candidate still maintain their composure, as it sounds like you did, and give an answer that kind of reflects a level of being in control and professionalism, and maybe thoughtfulness as well, being thinking on your feet, that kind of thing. Make sense?
It did. It does.
Great. So I would invite you next time you're in an organization, prior to making the decision, to really think about the cultural factors. They're incredibly important to most of us. You might want to start thinking about your own needs in terms of culture. So what are some of the organizational cultures that were most comfortable for you, that really promoted not only your performance, and the ability for you to excel supported that, but also made it the kind of environment that you didn't mind going into day after day after day, right? That's kind of so much of our work life and our life in general is spent within the confines of that culture.
Mm-hmm.
So, it certainly behooves you to make it a good experience, one that fits with who you are, with your values, with your belief system, with your attitudes. And while it's challenging to assess that prior to an interview and even during the interview, I hope I've given you some tips that can make you a little more mindful when you step into that organization, so that you can get a sense of how you are going to be treated once you accept that offer, right? Because typically, past performance, best predictor of future performance, that factors into the interview as well. How you are treated during the interview, the experience you have, is probably very much akin to how the organization treats its employees.
Well, let me.
Go ahead.
Hey, Gary, wanna kind of cut a hard stop here on you, but would love if we could give Gary, who really gives his time. He's a volunteer here, and he's been doing this for ever since almost our very first workshop back in 2010.
Since I was
so
12
everybody
years old.
Say that again?
Since I was 12 years old, I believe.
So let's give Gary a warm round of applause.
Wow, that's huge.
Oh, I'm doing it old school. I'm actually doing it. Okay, hold on.
Thank you very much.
And do know that we do have fun on these Monday nights, and we're going to be back actually next Monday, surprise, surprise, with Margaret Spence, who some of you might know as a former GEM SHRM board member, also a national SHRM presenter. I filmed her actually in Orlando last year, and she speaks nationally with the NAAA HR Association. She's going to be talking about social media tactics to escalate interviews for both HR job seekers and HR consultants. Kind of an interesting angle we're looking forward to. And with that, I want to say hello, Abby. I'm sorry we didn't get your microphone working. Jelly, great to see you tonight. Let's try to catch up here before the weekend on what's going on in July. Maybe we can make that announcement shortly. And JR, JG, all of our friends, great to see you guys. Call me if you just want to say hello or see what's going on. I might have a lead in Doral. Abby, give me a call because Luminaire, I might be on the phone with them again tomorrow here, so would love to reintroduce your interest that way. But hey, that said, you guys have a great night. Gary, thanks for being here, and hope to see everybody next week or at another event with your local SHRM chapter. All right?
Thank you, Gary.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you all. Pleasure.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.
Bye now.
Bye.
Bye.